Have you ever felt a match shift so intensely right under your feet that it feels like the entire sport is changing in real time? That exact electric energy took over the stadium on Saturday night in Toronto, turning what should have been a standard mid-tournament clash into an unforgettable moment that the sports world will be talking about for years to come. Somewhere right between the grueling second and third sets of a match that practically nobody outside of hardcore tennis enthusiasts was tracking just a week ago, a fierce 21-year-old rising star from the Philippines completely shattered the glass ceiling of what people ever thought was possible for her career. By the time the final match point sealed her victory, she had carved out a highlight reel moment that will live on forever. She went toe-to-toe with Katie McNally, a gritty competitor who had just pulled off a jaw-dropping upset over a reigning Wimbledon champion only days prior, and she refused to back down. She did it the hard way, grinding through 3 grueling sets after letting a tight second set slip right through her fingers, ultimately digging deep to secure a brilliant 6-3, 5-7, 6-4 triumph. If you look at this as just another routine box checked off on a standard tournament draw sheet, you are missing out on an incredible narrative. This wasn't just another casual day at the office for Alex Eala. This was a remarkable young woman standing tall inside a completely sold-out stadium bursting with proud fans waving Philippine flags, willingly shouldering the massive weight of an entire nation's hopes and dreams, and delivering under the most intense pressure imaginable. This is the exact kind of defining, high-stakes moment that legendary careers are built upon. So let's take a step back and look at how she even got to this point. Because the journey that brought her to this unforgettable Saturday night didn't just begin this week. It started months ago with a brutal shoulder injury and a devastating first-round exit that easily could have completely derailed her momentum and crushed her confidence. Instead of letting setbacks define her, Alex channeled that frustration straight into pure fuel for her fire. And if you have been keeping even a casual eye on women's tennis over the summer, you already know the iconic name that keeps getting whispered alongside hers, Maria Sharapova. Now, let's be completely clear, this isn't some manufactured media headline about a retired legend randomly chiming in on a random match just for clicks. There is something much deeper, much more authentic going on here, and it is worth properly understanding before we get ahead of ourselves. Alex has openly spoken on the record about growing up idolizing Sharapova, about drawing sheer grit and ferocious power from watching the Russian icon dominate, and about the deep-seated admiration that completely shapes a young athlete long before she fully understands the magnitude of what she is chasing. And later on, when Sharapova turned around and publicly called Alex a star after she stunned a defending Wimbledon champion, it wasn't just a random stranger throwing out a polite compliment to a stranger. It felt much closer to a seasoned mentor recognizing an unmistakable piece of her own fierce fighting spirit in someone entirely new. That powerful, emotional thread runs quietly underneath everything happening on the hard courts of Toronto right now. Let's rewind the clock just a little bit further to truly grasp why this hard-fought win over McNally matters so much. To understand the magnitude, you have to look at what Alex was physically and mentally carrying into this tournament just days prior. Only a week before touching down in Toronto, she was standing center court in Washington, D.C., playing in a final that absolutely nobody expected her to reach, let alone win. Across the net stood Jessica Pegula, a former world number 3 with the kind of intimidating, elite resume that makes most 21-year-olds nervous just reading it on paper. And right out of the gate, Alex dropped the first set. If you have ever spent time watching a young, developing player lose a tough opening set on a massive stage, you know how dangerously fast things can spiral downward. Self-doubt starts creeping into the mind, legs feel heavy as lead, and the roaring crowd noise suddenly feels like suffocating pressure rather than supportive energy. But instead of letting the moment swallow her whole, Alex completely flipped the script. She snatched the second set away and then absolutely ran away with the third in a dominant 6-0 sweep. When that final point touched the ground, she had achieved something no Filipino tennis player, male or female, had ever accomplished in the history of the sport. She had captured a WTA singles title, and not just any title, a championship earned by grinding through a top-tier opponent in a final that tested every single ounce of her tactical game and emotional composure. That is the exact kind of monumental achievement that fundamentally changes how an entire country engages with and watches a sport. Tennis has never historically been a mainstream pursuit in the Philippines the way basketball is deeply woven into the cultural fabric. The foundational sports infrastructure has simply never been there the way it is in traditional tennis powerhouses across Europe and the United States. And yet, here was a brilliant 21-year-old proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that none of those systemic limitations mattered nearly as much as the conventional wisdom assumed they did. So when Alex walked onto the grounds in Toronto just days later, still riding the high of that massive career milestone, nobody quite knew what to expect next. Would the physical exhaustion and intense emotional toll of the Washington run finally catch up to her body? Would the sudden, crushing weight of instantly becoming the main storyline of the entire tournament bog her down? Her very first answer on the court came against Peyton Stearns, or rather Alicia Parks, another dangerous American opponent who pushed her to another grueling three-set battle. Alex powered through with a decisive 6-1, 6-2 finish, showcasing once again that rare quality that separates good players from truly great ones. The innate ability to absorb a bad patch or a dropped set without ever losing the tactical thread of the match. And then came the showdown with McNally, and this is where the story gets its true, gritty texture. McNally wasn't just some random name pulled out of a favorable draw. She arrived in Toronto having just pulled off one of the most stunning upsets of the entire tournament by straight-setting Linda Noskova, the reigning Wimbledon champion. This wasn't Alex facing an easier opponent riding a lucky streak. This was Alex squaring off against someone with legitimate form, sky-high confidence, and a tactical game specifically built to completely disrupt the baseline rhythm that Alex loves to dictate. McNally loves to mix up the pace, aggressively rush the net, and rob her opponents of time before they can settle into any sort of comfort zone. For a set and a half, that tactical game plan worked to perfection. McNally captured that second set, and if you were tuned into the live broadcast, you could practically feel the collective tension tighten up inside the stadium, because everyone in the stands understood the high stakes. It wasn't just about advancing to the next round. It was about keeping alive a breathtaking sports story that the entire global Filipino tennis community had been holding its collective breath over since Washington. This is the crucial context that often gets lost when people simply glance at a final scoreline. The emotional stakes humming inside that venue were truly enormous. Families had traveled thousands of miles. Bright national flags were proudly draped over railings. Phones were held high recording every second, and an entire diaspora was glued to their screens back home in Manila, Cebu, and Davao. They were staying up late into the night or waking up before dawn just to catch a choppy live stream. And right in the blinding center of all that chaotic noise, Alex had to find a way to be the absolute calmest person in the arena. And she did just that. She completely reset her mindset after dropping that second set, rediscovered the pop on her serve, started dictating the pace of the rallies instead of just reacting to her opponent's power, and closed out the third set 6-4 to punch her ticket to the round of 16 against Belinda Bencic, a former champion of this very prestigious tournament. Let's be completely transparent with each other here, because this channel is not in the business of manufacturing fake drama or hyping up storylines that simply do not exist in reality. There is no verified, public moment this week of Sharapova sitting down and live reacting on social media to this specific McNally match. I am not going to sit here and invent a scenario where she fired off a specific tweet about this exact result, because that is not something anyone can honestly confirm. But here is what we do know for an absolute fact, and it is arguably far more meaningful than a single reactionary social media post anyway. The mutual respect and relationship between these two athletes already exists, is thoroughly documented, and is entirely real. It didn't just magically appear out of thin air this week. Alex has spoken candidly in numerous press conferences about looking up to Sharapova as a child, about studying her matches, and about borrowing that signature fierce competitiveness for her own matches. And when Alex stunned the tennis world earlier this year by taking down top-tier competition, it was Sharapova herself who unprompted and publicly referred to her as a star. That is the kind of rare, high-level endorsement that is never handed out casually by someone who has stood at the absolute summit of the sport, captured 5 Grand Slam titles, and worn the crown of world number 1. Sharapova knows better than almost anyone else on the planet what it feels like to be a young outsider, trying to break through an insular sport that wasn't originally built with someone like her in mind. Remember, Sharapova herself came up through the ranks as a young Russian teenager navigating a grueling professional tour dominated by different cultural backgrounds, different accents, and plenty of underlying assumptions about who truly belongs at the very top. When she looks at Alex, a left-handed Filipina carving out an unprecedented path through a country with virtually no traditional tennis infrastructure, it isn't hard to understand why she sees something deeply familiar in that journey. Even without a fresh headline dropping this exact week, the solid foundation of mentorship, mutual recognition, and a quiet passing of the torch from one generation to the next is already deeply embedded in the DNA of what is happening to Alex right now. Honestly, that rich background context matters far more than any ephemeral tweet because it proves beyond a doubt that this isn't some flash-in-the-pan media creation. It is a genuine, organic thread that has been building momentum